Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim Sani. I'm currently at the residence of the U.S. ambassador here in Kuala Lumpur. Of course, I'm here to join with the conversation of the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia as well as Pacific, Assistant Secretary Daniel Kritenbrink. Assistant Secretary, you are part of this is part of your 4-day tour of Indonesia and Malaysia. What will be some of the objectives that you intend to achieve following this 4-day work visit?
Sure. Well, Ibrahim, very nice to meet you. Thanks very much for agreeing to interview me. I'm really excited to be back here in Kuala Lumpur. This is, I think, my 3rd visit as Assistant Secretary, probably my 5th overall. But I had a couple of objectives on this trip. I started in Jakarta, where I had a 3-day trip, and the first 2 days were focused almost exclusively on ASEAN. We held the U.S. ASEAN dialogue, and then the East Asia Summit senior officials meeting. And I came out to demonstrate the strength of America's commitment to ASEAN, to ASEAN centrality, ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and to really make real our new comprehensive strategic partnership with ASEAN. And happy to talk more about that if you'd like.
Of course.
Then I spent a day in Jakarta doing exclusively bilateral meetings, talking with Indonesian friends about how to strengthen and deepen our partnership, and that's what brings me here today to Kuala Lumpur. I've saved the best for last. Here I've met with a number of officials, but we're here primarily to strengthen our partnership with Malaysia so that it delivers tangible benefits to both of our peoples. Okay,
let's talk a little bit of background to that. Southeast Asia, ASEAN is not a foreign area for you. You've been the ambassador to Vietnam.
Sure.
You've been the Assistant Secretary to this region for the past 2-3 years. 2 years?
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Do you feel that during your time as the chief U.S. diplomat in Vietnam back in 2017 versus how things have progressed since 2023, the geopolitical dynamic has risen in terms of the temperature, or do you feel that things have been more of status quo over the past few years?
It's a great question. Look, here's what I would say. First of all, I think our partnership with ASEAN and ASEAN member states never been stronger. Cooperation has never been deeper. Last year was a great year for the United States and ASEAN. President Biden hosted the 10 leaders of ASEAN at the White House for the U.S. ASEAN Special Summit. He then traveled to the ASEAN meetings, the East Asia Summit in Phnom Penh, where we formally upgraded our partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And of course, we're really excited about what we're going to achieve this year under Indonesia's chair year. I would say that we recognize that our future security, our future prosperity is inextricably tied to what happens in Asia, and specifically in Southeast Asia. 650 million people of ASEAN represent collectively the world's 4th largest economy. This is the youngest, most vibrant region in the world, and it's central to our interests, and we believe that our combined 1 billion people together have a very bright future. So that's what motivates us. That's what brings us here. Again, I think our cooperation is stronger than it's ever been before, and it's across the board, from our economic prosperity, our trade relations, to security, to people ties, to the work we're doing on transnational challenges. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah, but as I was asking earlier, the differences of temperature between the geopolitical landscape of then and now, do you feel that it has risen?
Yeah, probably, but I'd say a couple of things. First of all, our primary focus in the region is on partners, friends, and allies. That's what motivates me every day. That's the animating feature of American foreign policy under the Biden-Harris administration. So we spend the majority of our time focused on our partners like Malaysia. How can we build our collective capacity? How we can work together on shared goals? But yeah, we shouldn't kid ourselves either. I think the challenge posed by the People's Republic of China, I think, has grown in a range of areas. I think that's pretty clear. I think that's a fact of life, and we should face that squarely and honestly, and we do. But look, in my meetings with officials in the region, whether it's here in Kuala Lumpur or yesterday in Jakarta or across the entire region, we don't spend most of our time talking about China or other challenges. We spend the bulk of our time talking about how can we work together, and what is it that the United States offers to partners in the region. That's our primary focus, and that's where I think it should stay.
that would be a good background to give before we start to deep dive into the importance of the bilateral ties between U.S. and Malaysia.
Yeah.
I would argue that the relationship has never been better between the two
I agree.
countries. Particularly after the previous administration, we've seen how the current administration of both countries are now working towards trying to better improve our bilateral ties, especially in terms of economic ties. Do you feel that there would be some tangible and concrete results coming in economic-wise, when it comes to improving the ties between our two nations? Free trade agreement, for instance.
Well, look, I do. First of all, I'll say that our comprehensive partnership with Malaysia is long-standing.
Yeah.
It's broad-based. It's secure, and doesn't and that is a partnership that has endured changes in administration, both in Washington and in Kuala Lumpur. But look, I'm really excited to be here on this trip. I've had the opportunity to get to know the new officials in the administration of your new Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim. I've been excited by that. I'm really excited about our future together, and I think that momentum just continues to grow. Look, Malaysia's been a tremendous leader within ASEAN and across the region, tremendous partner for the United States, one of the region's leading economies. I think our security ties are very close. We worked really well through the pandemic. I had an opportunity earlier today to thank our friends in the Malaysian government for all the assistance that they gave us during the pandemic, and we were happy to reciprocate by providing vaccines and other assistance as well. I'm really optimistic about our future together, and I think it does mean a lot to, from a practical perspective for both of our peoples.
Considering that this bilateral tie between our two nations are strong, and considering that there are, against the backdrop or landscape of the rise of China in this part of the world, particularly some encroachment areas into the South China Sea, 9-dash dotted line, the build of islands on the atolls in South Asia, South China Sea. These are, I guess, flashpoints in terms for us to discuss in a concrete way. Do you feel that ASEAN has a collective voice would be better off as a collective voice discussing this together with the U.S. when it comes to, talking to our friends in China?
Here's what I would say, Ibrahim. We're going to leave to ASEAN and its member states to decide what's best in their interest, and as sovereign countries, you'll all make the right decision. Whenever I travel around the region, I run into friends who will say things like, are you asking us to choose? Do we have to choose between the United States and Beijing? And my answer is absolutely not. That's not what we're about. What we're about is investing in our partners, our friends and our allies, building their collective capacity. We don't want you to choose. We want to give you the power and the ability to make your own choices, to make your own decisions free from coercion. And if we do that, I think all of these issues are going to work out just fine. But as I said earlier, we should be clear and candid about, I think, some of the challenges that China does pose. We are concerned. We remain concerned about the situation in the South China Sea. You know better than anyone that
I highly doubt that.
Chinese,
you would know this.
Chinese entities, whether they're Coast Guard vessels or maritime militia forces or sometimes Greyhold Navy vessels, engage regularly in harassment, including of claimant countries like Malaysia. Your fishermen, they interfere with your ability to exploit the resources in the South China Sea. We think that's wrong. We think all countries, large and small, ought to play by the same rules. We think large countries should not bully the weak. We think that all countries ought to base and pursue their claims in accordance with international law, and disputes should be resolved peacefully. So that's what we stand for. We work closely with our friends in ASEAN who I think share that same vision of the kind of peaceful and secure region we want to live in, and that's where we'll focus our efforts.
Aside to traditional security concerns, climate change and environment has always been the center topic of the day. Everybody's impacted, including China, actually. They're taking rather concrete steps in trying to address this concern. Perhaps you could talk to the effect of using this as the common idea for all countries, large and small, in trying to find a solution. It does impact all of us.
Oh, I agree. I mean, maybe this is the perfect example of how we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Right? And we do focus on these traditional security issues. We're engaged on a daily basis in how we improve our trading relationship, how we grow prosperity. But look, if we don't find a way to deal with these transnational challenges, then we're all going to suffer. And my short list of the top transnational challenges would probably be climate change, combating pandemic disease, but there are many others, from food security to energy security, to even issues related to refugees and trafficking in persons. So these are issues that we're engaged on with our Malaysian partners on a daily basis. But we really are in it together. And to take your question back to our engagement with the People's Republic of China, this is another place where we've tried to appeal to our friends in Beijing that we also need to cooperate. Our relationship with China is mostly competitive, but we're also very much open to cooperating where it's in our interest to do so, where we have a responsibility to do so.
Would you say that they're
especially on things like
cooperating?
climate change and pandemic disease. Well, I'd say the picture is mixed. In some areas, yes, and in other areas, we've been disappointed that China has linked our cooperation on these transnational issues to some other problem in the bilateral relationship. We think that's unfortunate. We think that responsible powers have an obligation to work collaboratively on these transnational challenges that we all share.
The geopolitical situation in Europe is fraught.
Yeah.
One would like to argue that 2023, Taiwan's issue is going to be a greater concern. Do you feel that the portfolio that you have, the ambit that you hold right now, East Asia, is actually quite critical for us to navigate this in the best possible way? We don't want any rising tensions, but at the same time, some form of concrete measures must be taken in order for us to not have this persistent risk of political climate to go on in perpetuity.
Oh, I fully agree. I'll say a couple of things. More than ever, I'm convinced that European security matters and Asian security matters are indivisible. You can't distinguish between the two. What happens in Ukraine, for example, and the impact of Russia's illegal, unprovoked war in Ukraine, that has a global impact. And all of us around the world, including right here in Southeast Asia, we're impacted by that, right? Similarly, you raised the issue of Taiwan. The entire world has an interest in maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. We have a one China policy like so many other countries. Our one China policy has not changed. What is it really predicated on? It's predicated on maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and maintaining the status quo. We very much fear that that status quo is under threat by China. And if there were to be a crisis or, God forbid, a conflict across the Taiwan Strait, that would have a devastating impact, including on the global economy. 50% of global shipping goes through the Taiwan Strait. 90% of high-end chips come out of Taiwan. Even a crisis and tension around Taiwan could have a devastating impact on the global economy. So again, I'll go back to the previous question. We're really all in it together. We have an obligation to work towards maintaining peace and stability. And similarly, when we see countries that threaten to undermine that peace and stability, I think we have a shared obligation, to stand up and take steps to preserve that peace and stability.
Let's say, for instance, the semiconductor movement that the U.S. is making. Do you feel that this is one of those countermeasures that you speak of right now when it comes to trying to navigate China?
I think that's slightly different. I mean, we've taken some very narrow, targeted steps designed to protect our national security, affecting a very tiny segment of the semiconductor market, basically to prevent the most advanced chips from being used by the People's Liberation Army against the United States. We think that's a very reasonable step to take. But look, we are not pursuing a decoupling strategy. We continue to have a very important and robust trade relationship with China, more than $750 billion in bilateral trade flows last year. But we're not going to apologize for taking the steps that we think are necessary to protect our national security.
In your view, do you feel that China is putting pressure on many countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, to have that it's either them or us kind of option?
Well, look, I'll let Beijing speak to what its policies are. I think, as I said earlier, what are we about? We're not about asking countries to choose. What we are about is preserving countries' ability to make their own sovereign choices free from coercion. I think that's the key difference. And look, maybe to put a slightly finer point on it, I think our biggest concern that we've seen over the last few years with our friends in Beijing is they're increasingly willing to use coercion of all types to try to advance their interests. We don't think that's how responsible powers should act.
On other matters, do you feel that the issues of religious freedom, combating discrimination, and improving societal values, including the role of women in our society, is actually quite crucial for us to expand on through bilateral ties of our two nations?
Well, I do. Look, I think there's a lot to celebrate here. I love coming to Malaysia as two like-minded democracies. You know, we face so many of the same challenges. It was really gratifying to me today. I met with a number of counterparts in the Malaysian government. I think we're all grappling with the same issues. And look, I think issues of human rights and human dignity are really important to Americans, just like they are to Malaysians. Emphasis on and respect for human rights, it's part of Americans' DNA, and we don't apologize for valuing those issues and promoting them. But look, from a very practical basis as well, I know so many Malaysians share these views as well. We think the world's most successful and stable societies treat their people in a certain way and work peacefully and openly to resolve differences. And I think we share that vision together. But look, none of us have all the answers. None of us are perfect. America's an open book, and you can see our many strengths and our many weaknesses, and they're on full display.
Yeah.
That's who we are, and we're proud of that. And you know, we struggle with many of these same issues, and I know friends in Malaysia grapple with them as well. And what's really gratifying for me as a diplomat is I can come to a place like KL and I can exchange views, and we can learn from one another.
The final area of exploration that I want to have with you
Yeah.
is in terms of the domestic situation in America. Do you
Yeah.
feel that the polarity or the bipartisanship has worsened over the years? And how does this impact how the State Department exuberates your global power, project your global influence in countries like ASEAN?
Yeah, look, I would say that the United States, we're grappling with many of the same issues that countries and societies are around the world. You know, the impact of social media, the impact of polarization. We grapple with that every day. But what makes me so optimistic as an American, what I'm proudest of as an American, is what I said earlier. We continue to believe in certain ideals. We always strive, we say, to create a more perfect union. We know that we haven't always lived up to our ideals and the ideals of our forefathers, but we continue to strive towards that objective. You can see it today, you can see it throughout our history. We're obviously not perfect, we have many challenges, but I think we're all united by that desire to do better and to live up to those ideals. And we do it openly and transparently. We don't hide that. You can pick up any newspaper or watch any TV program in the United States, watch the news, and you can see what's going on. And we welcome that. That's who we are. And you know, like I said, I experienced that traveling around the region, around the world. Some of my conversations here today in KL, I think your democracy is facing some of those natural challenges. You know, it's we often joke that, you know, democracy is pretty messy. The human condition is pretty complicated.
Of course.
But we think that, you know, as democracies, when we grapple with those issues, we do it openly, we do it respectfully, we do it peacefully, even if we do it passionately. That's all to our benefit. That's what democracy is all
Before we
about.
end, maybe you can share with us one or two, I guess, concerns that you would have for this year, diplomatically speaking, and how do you think this would pan out over the near term?
Look, I think the concerns that we're focused on in the year ahead, I think are those that pose the greatest risk to the kind of world and the kind of region we're trying to build, right? What do we all want to see? We want to see a peaceful, stable, prosperous world where disputes are resolved peacefully. Deeply worried about the ongoing war in Ukraine, what that and the implications of that conflict for the entire world and for Asia as well. We know other countries are watching and learning lessons
And Secretary
from
of
that
State did
conflict
say
as well.
that China is now trying to sell arms into Russia, for instance. That's an area of concern.
Look, we're deeply concerned. I had the honor of accompanying Secretary Blinken to Munich, where he met with Wang Yi, China's senior-most diplomat. We, as we described to the press, we had a very candid conversation, and the Secretary was quite clear. We are concerned that China is considering selling, is considering providing lethal assistance to the Russian military to use in Ukraine. And we wanted to be absolutely clear what the consequences and the implications for such a move would be. So that does concern me. And then, you know, here in Asia as well, we've already talked about some of the challenges we see in the South China Sea, across the Taiwan Strait, of course the situation on the Korean Peninsula, the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. Those are all great concerns, but you know what motivates me, Ibrahim, and what allows me to get out of bed every day, go to work feeling optimistic is, despite those growing challenges, again, our partner relationships have never been stronger. I think about, again, the summit we had with our friends in ASEAN last year, the Pacific Islands summit that we had, the amazing summits we've had with our Japanese and Korean and Australian and other allies. That's really gratifying. And so even though I think the challenges are probably growing, and that's a concern, again, I think our partner relationships have never been stronger. And I'd argue that's certainly the case here in Malaysia. That gives me great optimism for the future.
Fantastic. It's been a great time speaking
Thank
with you.
you. You're very good.
No, not as good as you.
Oh,
that was our
so
conversation with
outstanding.
Daniel Kritenbrink, the Assistant Secretary of, oh my God, you have such a long title.
It's
Assistant
a long
Secretary of
title and a
State,
long
Bureau
name.
of East Asian Pacific Affairs. Remember to continue to stay with us on Astro Awani. There's going to be a lot of conversations like this that can be found on all our platforms, including astroawani.com. So do stay with us until then. Thanks very much for watching. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.
Thank you, Ibrahim.